Welcome to Overflowing Bookshelves, a podcast for people who love the written word. Could you spend hours browsing through a bookstore? Is your happy place curled up under a blanket with a good book, or perhaps writing a story of your own? Are you constantly adding to your to-be-read list, even though your bookshelves are already overflowing? If so, this podcast is for you. Tune in to hear authentic conversations with published authors about their creative processes, paths to publication, and advice for living your most fruitful and inspired life. I'm your host, Dallas Woodburn, and I am absolutely delighted that you are here with us today. I am the author of the short story collection, Woman Running Late in a Dress, and the YA novel, The Best Week That Never Happened. I'm also a professional book coach, and I am passionate about helping people give birth to their own unique stories. You can connect with me at my website, dallaswoodburnauthor.com, and on Facebook and Instagram at dallaswoodburnauthor. Throughout the month of December, I am hosting a giveaway to celebrate the upcoming release of my debut YA novel, The Best Week That Never Happened. All you have to do to enter is mark my book as Want to Read on Goodreads. That's it. I have lots of fun prizes that I'll be giving away on December 31st. Without further ado, let's dive into today's interview. I'm thrilled to be with author Andrew Buckley today for episode 1 of this podcast. Andrew is an author, a screenwriter, and a podcaster. He is the author of 2 novels for adults, Death, the Devil, and the Goldfish, and STILTSKIN, which were both published by Curiosity Quills Press. And he is also an author of the book series Hair in All the Wrong Places, which is geared for a younger audience and was published by Month 9 Books. In addition to writing, Andrew speaks to thousands of elementary school, middle school, and high school students every year about storytelling and writing through the delivery of interactive and engaging workshops and presentations. He also co-hosts a geek movie and TV podcast and is working on several new novels. Andrew says he has a stunning amount of other ideas and is currently attempting to bend time and space to allow for more hours in the day. Who can relate to that? I definitely can. Andrew lives happily with 1 beautiful wife, 3 kids, 2 needy dogs, and a multitude of characters who live comfortably inside of his mind. I know that you're going to really enjoy this interview with author Andrew Buckley today. I'm sure you will learn a lot, as I did, and also come away really excited to dive into Andrew's books if you have not already. So without further ado, let's get to the interview. I'm so delighted to be here with Andrew today. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. So excited to be here with you.
Thank you for having me.
I would love to just start off by asking you about your journey as a writer. So maybe to give us a little background with how you became a writer in the first place.
Okay. It was the only thing I was ever really good at in school. I was a terrible, terrible student. And I grew up in England. I did most of my schooling, or my secondary school was there. And in school, I was horrible at math, at science, French. I still can't remember a word, but English was the one thing that I could always do really well, especially the writing side of it. So I weirdly had an American English teacher who was called Mrs. Mallinson, and she was kind of my mentor for those few years while I was in secondary school and really encouraged me to write. And then when I moved to Canada, I moved here to become a screenwriter. That's kind of my goal, was to work in the film industry and write, wonderful big budget action movies and vampires and monsters and all kinds of fun stuff. And I went to film school to learn that craft. Just before that, I went to college here locally in Kelowna, up in Canada, and I met my second writing mentor, who's called Tim Perrin. And he taught me a lot about screenwriting, about story and that kind of stuff, and he really encouraged me on. And then when I went to film school, I learned that craft, graduated, and decided that's not what I wanted to do in the slightest. because it was such a flooded industry. And that was before there was any digital publishing, any self-publishing. In the literature industry, it seemed like it was such a nice, even playing field where you had to get an agent in order to get a publisher. And I thought, you know what, I like how defined that is.
Yeah.
So that's what I'll do. I'll stop writing screenplays because everybody and their dog is writing a screenplay, and I'll write a novel instead. It took me like 6 years because I didn't know what I was doing. And by the time I'd finished, self-publishing had become a thing, digital publishing had become a thing, and the literary landscape was like all over the place. So it was no longer what it was when I'd started. So it made it a bit more of a challenge. But I kind of persevered, and I finished my first novel. It took 6 years, or my second one, which took 2 years. And then I met my first publisher through Twitter, randomly. Not through, I mean, I sent hundreds of queries. I'd received hundreds of rejections from agents, from publishers. And it was quite literally me tweeting weird stories about this evil cat I used to own. And this one website thought it was really funny. And they were just a blogging site for writers at that point. Uh-huh. And I had met them. They took a few short stories about that cat off me, and then I fell out of touch for about a year. And then a year later, I went back and became an independent publisher.
Wow!
My first 2 books, and yeah, it all kind of went on from there. They're mostly out of business at this particular point, but that's where I was first published.
That's amazing. I love just the, I guess, serendipity of it, which I think that if you hadn't been sending out all of those queries, I don't know. I like to think that maybe that serendipitous moment wouldn't have happened because it was like you were putting yourself in the right place, but then I just love that it came in this totally different direction.
Well, it was an interesting experience. I mean, the whole query writing thing it's what writers are always terrified of, because it's such a scary process to go through, having to take this massive thing you've written and just boil it right down into like this tiny little thing that's supposed to interest some stranger sitting behind a desk.
That gets so many, that reads through so many of them every day.
Yeah. So, I mean, the whole process is scary anyways. And out of the rejections, I mean, a lot of them are just foreign rejections, but there were some people who were really, really useful. And there was one agent, I wish I'd actually kept it, because he was really nice. And he wrote back a personal email saying, I really love the idea. I think it's hilarious, because it was humor, satire, urban fantasy thing. But it's not really for me, because I don't represent humor, and humor is tricky because one person's laugh is another person's groan, and it's just a real subjective thing for people to read. So agents and publishers are usually like, I don't know. But he said, I have a couple of suggestions for you. He said, on one thing, you need to start a website so that you can get yourself online and start blogging about anything, write about anything, doesn't matter. And he said, the second thing I need you to do is get on social media, because Facebook was just emerging, 2002, 3-ish, 4-ish. And Twitter was just mostly used by celebrities, but it was growing. He said, just start. He says, I see that in the future, everybody will be on social media, and that's how you're going to reach an audience. So he kind of foresaw 6-7 years ahead of his time that was going to be something that was going to be really useful. And so that's what I did. That's why I was tweeting, and that's how I met my first publisher. So it was through that one rejection letter that I kind of found my way inadvertently to actually getting a publishing contract.
Wow, that is so neat. I love that. And so your first contracts, were they without an agent? You just were straight to the publisher?
Yeah, it was unagented at that point. It was called Curiosity Quills Press. I think the website's still active, and I think my first 3 books are still on Amazon under them at the moment.
They are, because I was looking you up before our interview.
So they agreed to publish my first 2 novels. They signed them right away, and then they got released consecutively in 2012 and 13, I think, or 13 and 14. And it was a neat experience, and because they were so new and they were still growing at that particular point, they asked if I would start working for them after they signed me, and asked if I would read queries. So I'm like, yeah, sure. I'd love to see what the other side of this world actually looks like.
Yeah.
And so I did that. And then they asked if I had any ideas as to how to kind of clean up their query process. So I took their acquisitions department and kind of remodeled it.
Wow.
I managed it from a virtual office, and then I did the same thing with their production department, because they were growing really fast, and they were growing so fast that they couldn't really manage their own production pipeline. So I went in and cleaned all that up, and then I went back to just managing the acquisition. So I worked for them about 5 years.
Wow. And so did you feel like you learned a lot from seeing the other side of the process?
Yeah, it's totally different because as an author, you definitely see it as one, sided in that, oh, they're
Yeah.
rejecting me, or they're so judgy about this, or oh, this is why did they do that? It makes no sense. When you see it from the other side, it's like, oh, I totally see why they did that. It makes absolute sense.
Yeah.
So it's just it was nice to see both sides of the coin and see how that, everything was kind of made behind the scenes and
Yeah.
what influences, how books are successful or how books fail. Or it was very interesting.
Yeah. And I wonder too if even just realizing that it's a real it's real people behind those
Mhm.
names. Like I know for myself when I send out queries or sometimes it's like it feels like I'm sending it into the ether or it's
Oh,
just this
totally.
name on a website and it's
Mhm.
easy to forget that it's actually a real person who's going to read my work and like you said it's so subjective, but I wonder if maybe that also is kind of a nice experience to have to be part of that from that side.
Yeah, it was definitely it was a real learning experience, especially the first couple of years, just kind of learning the ins and outs of it. And as it grew, and as I spoke with other publishers and found out how what best practices are for how they were doing things, and marketing was like the hellish thing that all publishers seem to hate, because they don't really technically manage marketing. They're there to produce the books and put it out into the world. But then
Uh-huh.
the marketing is like this weird limbo that doesn't belong to publishers. It kind of belongs to authors.
Uh-huh.
It really belongs to publicists, but they're so expensive. So it's a weird mishmash of things that go into actually making a book successful. And in some cases, it's a matter of falling ass over backwards into success. And in some cases, it's just a lot of very consistent hard work to
Yeah.
get it out there.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that consistent hard work because I definitely see that as something that you do with your career. I first got introduced to your work when I got my literary agent because we share the same literary agent and he mentioned you to me. And so I looked up your books and I started with Hair in All the Wrong Places and now it's a trilogy. So I think when I um, heard of you first, there were just the first two out, but then now Here in All the Wrong Places 3 is out as well.
Yep.
And I would just love to hear a little bit about writing a trilogy. To me, that seems so just like out of my range. I feel like to me, just one book seems long enough. So the idea of having a storyline for a whole trilogy, I'd love to just hear what that was like and maybe where you got the idea for that. And also, I love your humor in those books, which you were mentioning that can be something that is tough to do as a writer. So I guess just whatever you want to talk to us about with Hair in All the Wrong Places.
Okay, so Hair in Northern Places I guess I'd never written a book with an intention that it was going to be more than just a single book. Like even
Okay.
now, I'd always, having said that, when I wrote Death, Devil, and the Goldfish, when I wrote STILTSKIN, when I wrote HAVELOCK, I left them all with open-ended. With Death, Devil, and the Goldfish and STILTSKIN, I think I left them with an actual fairly brutal cliffhanger that I still get really shouted at a lot today because I haven't finished the sequels for those books. But Hair in All the Places was always written as a standalone. It was my first foray into middle grade because well, to take a step back, I started writing as an adult horror novel because I always wanted to try my hand at horror. The fact is, I don't have the ability to do it. So when I started writing it, I had this wonderful, creepy idea, but then as I'm writing it, I couldn't help but inject my own personality, my own tone, and my own humor into it. And I started to realize that I can't write a straight horror. So then I was like, I'll write a young adult novel instead, because then my kids can read, and my kids have been screaming for something to read that I've written that they're allowed to read because they weren't. So I thought, I'll age it down and I'll turn it into kind of a werewolf slash puberty story. So on one hand, this character Colin is, going through puberty, the same changes that teenagers go through, and at the same time, he gets bitten by this ancient werewolf. And so I thought it was kind of a neat concept to, create this town that was like government sanctioned. And I'd always really loved werewolf stories growing up. My dad would always record like the late night horror movies for me because in England we only had 4 channels. All the really good stuff was on late at night.
Uh-huh.
So he would record American Werewolf in London and The Lost Boys and those kinds of movies that I wasn't really supposed to be watching, but he was kind enough to record those so I could watch later. And werewolves I really enjoyed. So I always thought I could write a really great werewolf novel. Started as a horror novel, didn't work, became a young adult novel. I'd already met my agent, our agent, by this point. Um, And so he was waiting for whatever I was going to be writing next. So I wrote Here in Northern Places as a young adult novel. I think the main character was 17. And then when I submitted it to him, he showed it to one of his colleagues, and they came back to me and said, could you age it down to middle grade? Because a lot of publishers are looking for middle grade novels that are relatable to teenage boys. Because at that particular point, 6 years ago, there was a gajillion things out there for teenage girls. So many female protagonists at that age. But there wasn't a ton that related to boys. So he said, if you could age it down a little bit more, we can package it as a middle grade or an upper middle grade novel and get it out there that way. So that's kind of where it came about to be what it is. And then Month 9 Books with Georgia McBride picked it up, which was awesome. Because I'd heard lots of great things about those guys, and they packaged it and put it out. And then I had an option in the contract for a sequel, and I hadn't really thought a ton about a sequel, because in my mind it was just a nice standalone story about puberty and dealing with power and changes and all that kind of fun stuff. So then I had to start thinking about what that would look like, because even in the past when I'd written things onto a cliffhanger, I had an inkling of where it would go if, you know, I had to write a sequel, but I didn't think about it in the terms of this overarching story. I was just thought of, you know, well, it could probably go in that direction maybe somewhere. But with this, I was like, oh my God, this has to be an actual, like, it's got to end somewhere, and I need to understand. There has to be. I don't have a Voldemort was my problem. I don't have a main villain to go with. So I had to kind of backtrack a little bit and figure out, okay, what would happen if this is 2 books, if it's 3 books, if it's 4 books, or whatever. It is sketched out to 4, so the third one does end on a fairly large cliffhanger, so it would technically be a quadrilogy. Yeah, quadrilogy. Yeah. So that's currently what it's mapped out at, and I've written 3 of them, and I'm taking a break from that particular series. But yeah, it was weird trying to come up with how that would work as far as having, you know, a really main big bad for Colin to deal with, but at the same time having those, you know, 3 or 4 self-enclosed stories to actually keep the character developing and introduce the new characters, and, you know, keep the tone consistent without it going too dark or too light. Or it was interesting. It's definitely, this has been a super duper learning experience for me to write a series.
It makes me think too, I wonder if just your past training as a screenwriter, do you think it came in at all with the idea of kind of mapping out the stories and like having the plot arcs and everything?
I think it did, in that screenwriting is very similar to novel writing as far as the story structure and process is concerned. Now, I went to film school in 99. Things were not being geared as much toward being turned into a series as they are now. Now, everything is, if you write something, you better have in mind that this is going to last forever. And you need to understand what it's going to be like in 10 years. And, you know, so I think it's a different mindset nowadays. But I do think the screenwriting definitely helped influence a couple things for me as a writer. Dialogue, one thing, and scene structure. I write a little bit differently, especially in the new novel I've been working on. It's definitely more structured so that the reader can really visually see what's happening, because I have multiple characters, and when you have multiple characters, I find it easier to write that way.
Yeah, so it's like we see the story from different points of view.
But I mean, that can get dangerous too, right? I mean, you have too many characters, it's head hopping, and the reader can get really confused. So your tone, the dialogue has to be unique for each character. Like, it really each character has to stand alone enough that when you do make that leap, that you're like, oh, I'm in this person's point of view, I'm in this point of view, and it all ventures toward this, you know, whatever conclusion it is you're going toward.
Yeah, and you have to make sure. I've read books before like that where I really enjoy one character a lot more than the other. So it's like when I get to the chapters, I'm kind of skimming through to get back to that character that I love.
Yeah, Game of Thrones was like that, because I remember reading it and thinking, I can't wait for, you know, a Tyrion chapter. I can't wait for an Arya chapter. I'm like, oh, I'm on a Cersei chapter. So, I totally get what you're saying.
Well, I can tell just from the way that you talk about writing that you must be an excellent writing teacher. Can you talk a little bit about the online writing school that you're starting?
Yeah, It started out last year. I developed a novel writing course because I teach. I visit a lot of schools and I do workshops and storytelling classes in schools as a visiting author. And I've done that in BC. I've done that in Washington. I did it most recently down in Vegas. So I kind of got around with it. But when it came to the summer, there wasn't much to do because, of course, kids aren't in school. So I thought, I'll develop a writing course that I can actually teach locally here, and I can just offer it through, a local place, and I'll do it. So I wrote a novel writing course, taking all those different elements, and I wrote it specifically for people who were like me in 2002, who wanted to write a novel, didn't really know where to start, and not really sure how to keep myself motivated, and because when you start, you just don't know what you don't know. Even if you got a great grasp of writing English, it doesn't matter when you come to writing a novel. It's a different kettle of fish. Yeah. So I wrote a course specifically for those people, so that to give them a leg up, so that they don't have to go through what I went through for 6 years, trying to figure out, does this work? Does that work? Is that right? Does that work? So I wrote a course. I delivered it in summer, 7 weeks, and then again fall, and then again this past spring, and I'm in the middle of a summer series right now. But early this year, I decided that I was going to put it online and try and build something bigger. So I partnered with a friend of mine, Maurits Nienhuis. I'm going to butcher his last name. He's Dutch. And he's a web developer and a videographer. And he said, we could definitely make this like an online school. So we built a big plan. So Wordsmith Academy, and you can see the bare bones at wordsmithacademy.com. That was what we're building toward. So we have a YouTube channel. We're going to launch in the fall. It'll be the novel writing course will be the first piece that we're going to launch. But we have a screenwriter out of Los Angeles who's going to record a screenwriting course for us. It's going to be a community hub for writers. It's going to have a whole bunch of resources, and it's going to be a subscription model, we think. But yeah, we're working toward getting it up and running, and it's going to be super fun.
That is fantastic. I will definitely include the link to that in the notes here, so everyone should check it out. And I love that you'll be offering, it seems like, so many different courses so that people can, like you, maybe someone comes in thinking, oh, I really want to do screenwriting, and then they take the novel writing course and they think, oh, actually, maybe that's for me. And to me, that's one of the beauties of writing, is that you can jump around. You don't have to just, stick with one thing forever.
Yeah, I mean, people might think they want to do one thing, but they don't know about the other stuff that's out there. Because we have screenwriting, then we'll have TV writing. We're going to develop some courses for creative writing that are specific to different age groups. So elementary, high school, that'll get licensed to schools. We'll have free resources, we'll have paid resources, and there'll be author services as well. So, taking a look at queries, taking a look at synopsis, taking a look at story and a manuscript, like just trying to help people get to that finish line, because of course authors, so many writers start and then never finish. So we're kind of hoping this will help drag them through that process and push them and prod them and get them to where they need to be.
That's fantastic. Yes. I mean, it's so easy to start, but it can be a whole different animal getting to that endpoint. And I think having accountability and also having a cheerleader or someone to, encourage you, and then also having someone to be a mentor, like you mentioned, having multiple mentors in your past. I think those things are so important. Is there any other advice that you love to give to young writers when you talk to schools, when, kids or even adults ask you, what is your biggest advice for them if they want to become a writer?
Yeah, there's two things. One, especially for young writers, is to keep writing. Because you don't think about it when you're young, because the entire world is before you and it doesn't matter as much. But the fact is, if you feel that you're a writer and you want to write, like, you should write, and you should write lots, as much as you can. Because when it gets to that point where all of a sudden it becomes serious and you land a publishing contract, or you meet your literature agent, or you pitch something to somebody in the right place at the right time, then if you've been writing already for this period of time, you've got all sorts of stuff to draw off. You might have some past books that are just sitting there doing absolutely nothing. Like I wrote a novel and I wrote a second one and I sold them both. I was like, oh crap, I have nothing else. So even when I met Mark, a literary agent, I didn't have anything to actually give him. I had 2 past novels. I'm like, this is what I've done in the past. Please represent me. But I didn't have anything new to give him. So I do encourage, especially young writers, to just write and write and write. That's important. The second thing is to persevere. so many writers give up, whether they give up writing, whether they give up trying to get their work published. They just give up. So persistence is like key in this industry. You're guaranteed to fail if you quit. But like if you keep going, it's the people that keep going and keep trying and trying and trying that find a way in some way. And there are so many different ways into this industry now that there's no reason to give up. But perseverance is key.
I love that. And that's a perfect place to end, those words of encouragement. How can listeners or viewers get in touch with you? What's the best way for them to follow you?
You can find me you can find links to my books, social media, you can find contact forms, public speaking, all that kind of stuff at andrewbuckleyauthor.com. And then if you want to check out Wordsmith Academy, you can join the mailing list at wordsmithacademy.com. And yeah, follow me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. I'm always active on those forms of wonderful communication that take up so much time.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrew. And be sure to check out Andrew's books. I'm already excited to read the 4th installment of Here in All the Wrong Places and your other novel, your other standalone. So
oh yeah, the new one.
Can't wait for more work of yours. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dennis.
Thank you so much for spending time with me today on Overflowing Bookshelves. If you enjoy this podcast, it would mean so much if you take a few minutes to write a review on iTunes or Stitcher to help other writers and book lovers find out about us. If you are kind enough to share this episode on social media, be sure to tag me at Dallas Woodburn Author on Instagram or Facebook. I love to surprise my listeners with fun prizes like free books and other literary swag. Also, I would love to hear your thoughts on the show and your ideas for future guests. Please visit my website, dallaswoodburnauthor.com, to connect with me and offer your suggestions. Until next time, happy reading!